that amazing introduction, Amanda, and it's great to have everybody on board here for this evening's session. As Amanda mentioned, I am going to be taking you through some tips and tricks around visual and video content. I'm very focused on some practical tips that you can take away and implement as soon as possible. I understand how it is in a small business. So I think if we move on, I thought what we do is to get started with a little poll. And what I'm asking you to do is to just answer in the chat. Now, don't worry, this is a warm-up question. It's an easy one. So here goes. Who has the longest attention span? Is it 1, a goldfish, or 2, a human? So if you'd like to let me know what you think on that one, answers in the chat, please. So 1 for goldfish and 2 for human. We got some answers coming in there. 2 human, 2. I am absolutely delighted to see so many 2s coming up here. You know, I've actually heard this said so many times at different conferences that I've been at around the world, you know, that we have an attention span that's much less than a goldfish. And I really think it's time to actually stop with that. If I've learned anything over the last few years, and I'm sure everyone will agree, it's that we don't actually have a problem with attention. I mean, I, for one, binged a lot on Netflix and Prime, and I'm kind of holding my hand up here. The reality is that we have actually got great attention spans, but we've great attention for the things that interest us and entertain us and are relevant to us. So I think, you know, if you're like me and you check your phone and you see that, you know, you had 4 hours plus a day, you realize you actually don't have attention problem at all. Your phone is getting a lot of your attention. So I think what we need to remember here is that we give our attention to things we enjoy, that interests us, and is relevant to us. And as a business, we can actually use that insight to our advantage when we're trying to get our audience's attention. But let's have a little bit more on that in a little while. So if we're moving on here, I think the good news is that when it comes to visuals and photos, they're excellent at getting people's attention. We only have to look at the volume of photography and imagery and videography in particular being shared to figure out that they're particularly important. And I think this particular statistic, you know, around how much video is being uploaded every day is kind of shocking in a way. It's the equivalent amount to 8 years of watching. So you can just imagine how much that is. And I think if we're moving on, we can see that, you know, it's easy to feel very overloaded. And as a business, you know, the question really is, how can you cut through all that noise? There's actually 4,000 plus images being shared each day, and that's how much we're being bombarded with, and it's only growing further. So if you move on there, we'll see this here. And 10,000 messages a day. So, I mean, as a business, we're questioning how do we actually cut through all of that noise? So let's move on. I think the reason why there has been such an explosion in the use of imagery and video, particularly in the last 5 years, the reality is that photography and video, you know, our brains are actually wired for them. Photography and video create an emotional connection with an audience in a way that words alone just can't match. And I think the other factor here is that social media platforms, the likes of TikTok and Instagram, they do finesse their algorithms to support more video. But I would say, and I would say this from a content agency perspective, words do matter in marketing, but they work even harder when we combine them with the right images. But I think with all those messages that are actually bombarding us every day, it is true that while we don't have the attention span of a goldfish, attention is actually the currency, and we really do need to get good at earning the attention from our customers. Because we live in an attention-based economy. And, you know, a customer's attention is one of a marketer's most valuable commodities. So now that we know that images and videos are important, and I think we all agree, how do we use them to connect with our customer? And how do we stand out from all that noise? Well, I think the first thing that I'd say here is that, you know, and this is something that we absolutely have to remember, there has to be something in it for the customer. And you'll see in this little simple diagram here, you know, the real sweet spot in our communication and in marketing is where your brand value over here on the left intersects what your customer actually wants and needs. And I would, you know, producing video and photography, that's the bit that we're trying to reach here, this sweet spot in the middle. And in that sweet spot, the right content really is the fuel for engagement. But I believe that to achieve that connection with our audience, we have to remember that it's them and not us who is the most important person. And I think that if we focus on that question of what's in it from them, you know, that sounds really simple, but it actually is amazing how many businesses are making content, shooting videos, and commissioning photography without maybe thinking about that. So if we move on, I'd like to share this very simple model I call the 4 Qs, or 4 questions. And this is designed to help us focus on our audience. Now, these are the 4 questions I would recommend that you all answer before you make any content. So before you commission videography or take out your smartphone to capture photos, these are the 4 questions that are really the basis of every content strategy. So what are they? Well, the first one, as we can see here on the left, who is it for? But most importantly, why should they care? So this is our audience, and we really need to understand our audience before we start to invest in any kind of content. Secondly, how do we want them to feel? So what are we looking, you know, to make that emotional connection with video and photography? Do we want them to feel curious? Do we want them to feel entertained? What emotional connection are we actually going for? Then we ask a very important question. What do we want them to do? Do we want them to click on a website, watch the video? Do we want them to make a booking? Do we want them to comment on our posts? So we're thinking about that before we actually create those assets. And finally, the question that's really important and often forgotten, how do we know that it works? These are the metrics that we want to track. For example, website visits and social, completion time on a video. So I believe when you answer these 4 Qs before you create photos or videos or any content for that matter, you're much more likely to earn that attention and influence customer behavior. So I think if we move on now, I'm going to share actually shortly some tips about finding out what your customers want. But first, I think let's take a look at different types of visual assets. And each of these has its pros and cons. And I'm sure you'll be familiar with most of these. So at the start, we have DIY. And it does what it says on the tin. Essentially, this is where you or one of your team makes the video or takes the photos yourself. And essentially, most of us are able to create this kind of content now with our smartphone and a little bit of basic skill. I think what's good in this using DIY content is that it's relatively inexpensive. It can be great for getting that behind the scenes content that people seem to love on social in particular. And it lets you capture authentic footage of your business. And I think we've seen that authenticity is becoming more and more important in marketing. But at the same time, DIY, it can be quite time consuming, particularly around video. And especially if you don't have more than just the basic skills. So that's DIY. Next, we have stock photos and videos, and I do believe that these have a place, and these would include free and also paid sources. So for free sources, we'd include the likes of Ireland's content pool, which I have to say is invaluable. And if you don't have a free account for Ireland's content pool, I would strongly suggest that you register today. It has a great inventory of brilliant images and also video from right across the country. Now, there's also free stock sources, the likes of Pixabay. I will mention a couple of more a little bit later on. Next, we have professionally produced video and photography. Now, this gives you a really good base of great quality images and video, and essentially you get exactly what you want. But I think this does require a budget and also a very clear brief. And so finally, then we have user-generated content, which has grown in popularity, particularly over the last number of years. We call it UGC, so that's user-generated content. And this is where the photography or video are created perhaps by your customers, by your staff, or through an influencer collaboration. And what we've seen is that UGC can be really effective. It actually falls under word of mouth marketing. And word of mouth has been proven to drive purchase intent. And in fact, influencers have really built entire careers on this. One stat that I like from Statla shows that 60% of people believe UGC is the most authentic marketing content. So that gives us pause for thought about, how can we incorporate that into our own approach and strategy. And I think we've seen lots of brands are now using UGC content on their websites. They're repurposing it for social media. Some are even using it as product photography because it has that level of authenticity and it can represent the products and the brands in real life. So I do believe UGC is very helpful and is a good, it's a good medium to include in your overall approach. So if we move on then, let's have a look at what the overall mix looks like. Now, I think it really depends on your budget. Most of us will start with our existing photography and videography. We may decide to do a mix of DIY. If we have the budget, we may commission a professional photographer. And if we're on social in particular, we're probably more likely to go with user-generated content. I do believe that, if possible, it makes sense to have at least one professional shoot with video and stills for your website and marketing materials. And that's where you actually commission out a videographer and photographer to do that for you and to get that capture. So if we can incorporate an element of DIY, of UGC and stock to fill our content calendar, we're off to a very good start. And so, for example, even in terms of free images, go to Ireland Content Pool, see what's there. The only word of warning I would give around UGC is that, we need to be careful when we're approaching professional photographers and videographers about using their content. I've seen this play out a little bit on social. The reality is that it's their livelihood. So I do believe that we as businesses should be offering them something in return. So that's just a little pause for thought. So I think moving on, it's time to talk about what our audience really wants. As I mentioned earlier, this is absolutely fundamental to working out what images and what videos from your business will best motivate your customers. So the first thing that I would do is to actually start with an image audit. So if we move on there, what I would suggest is that you run through this exercise. There's 4 simple steps here before you commission any photography, videographer, or plan actually your content calendar. So the first thing to do is to actually write a list of your main audiences, and I would put these in order of importance to your business. So I suppose this is where you're asking yourself, are they young couples? Are they families with small children? Are they early retirees? Are they active singles? It'll very much depend on the business you're in. And it's a good idea to get as specific as possible. So for example, rather than a young couple, is it a young couple in their 20s who like to go hiking in the local national park? Or perhaps if you're in an experienced business, is it families with young children under 7 years of age who like to use the playground? So next, what we do is we jot down what the unique selling point or the USP of your business is to each of those specific audiences. I think it's important to note that it would not be the same for all audiences. Some may have some in common, but they do have different motivations and needs depending on the audience. And I think if you remember to go back to the 4 Qs and you run through that exercise for each of the audiences, you'll be off to a really great start. So for example, it could be that young couple in their 20s who like to go hiking in the national park, or the family with kids under 7. So what we do then is we look to the images that we have Do we have images that illustrate that user, the USP to your audience? So have you got images of couples in their 20s, or is it just all images of your accommodation, for example? And what about those families with the young kids? Do we have images of those young kids enjoying the playground, or is it just of something else in your attraction? I think the big thing here is, can your audience very easily identify with the images that you are using to promote your business? Would they see themselves if they looked at the gallery on your website? So I think the general rule really is simple. It's to make sure your video aligns with your audience and their USPs. And it's also really important that your images are as diverse as your customers are, especially when it comes to the people in them. So if we move on, we have a very simple little example here. And so what you're doing is you're answering the questions about your audience and your USPs. And this is how you go about creating a shot list aligned to what your audience is and what your audience wants. So essentially a shot list is a simple list of images that you'll either take yourself, you'll source or commission a photographer to capture. And again, it's about being specific. So it's a really good idea to fill this in, start with the images that you already have, and then you'll be able to identify gaps based on the USPs of your specific audience as they relate to your business. So if we move on, it's important that we do our research to influence that perfect shot list. And for every business, it's about building out and continually adding to the shot list. And I think the good news here actually is that there's a lot of ways that we can get some very, very useful insights as to what should be on that shot list. I know online reviews, staff feedback can be particularly helpful, and I will run through a number of ideas there in a moment. What we're doing is we are aiming to create a visual showcase of what our audience needs and wants for a business. You'll see the nice image of a seafood chowder there on the right. I mean, it goes without saying, if seafood chowder is a legend in your business, you are going to include images that capture that. Okay, so let's have a look at some ideas for how we can find out what our audience actually wants. I believe booking engines can give us a lot of hints about what our potential audience likes. They're actually set up with super useful filters, and they're based on popular criteria. So as a starting point, you could check out the list of top attractions in your area. We've run this one here for things to do in Dingle. And I think it's important to remember that people are buying into a destination, not just your accommodation or your experience. So I think it's important to set the visual context for them on your website and in your other marketing materials and socials, as to, where they're actually visiting. So here we would look at what's likely to sell out attractions, and we'd be looking at ways to include videography or images of those attractions. You could note also how they categorize experiences. They tend to use terms like cultural tours, day trips, full day outings. Do we have images that would cover that? And I think it's also really important to check out what travelers are saying. You'll find that section on the booking engines, and that'll also help to add inspiration to your shot list. So if we move on, you'll also see a lot more information you can find out from these booking engines. You'll see the way they have kind of checkboxes there, and they include things like hiking and cycling, a lot of fun things to do. And these booking engines are great at this because they know what visitors like. So for example, if it looks like there's a number of opportunities around, say, examples with pets, is that relevant to your business? Should you be adding images like that onto your shot list? I do believe also reviews are just a brilliant place to find out what your audience thinks your unique selling points are. And this is a great example from a hotel in Donegal. And if you look to the right, you'll see these are real life comments that come from the review section. You can see the breakfast is mentioned once here. It was mentioned many, many dozens of times in the list of reviews that we looked at. People also love the fact that the property has views of the fishing harbour. It calls out Killybegs in particular, and even the friendly receptionist gets nod. And so I'd say like your reviews are full of hints, you know, so start looking at what people are saying about you and match your images and your video to that. I think if we move on, we can have a look at how this applies to an experienced business. You can check out online reviews on booking engines like Viator and TripAdvisor. And this is an interesting example from Hook Lighthouse. And when we look at the comments there, visitors loved the fact that they could have an alfresco lunch beside Hook. So why don't we get images of that? Then they said that there was incredible views from the viewing platform. They were indescribable. So can we include images of that indescribable view? Jason, who was a tour guide down there, also gets a mention. So is there an opportunity to include images of Jason? And the kids' play area was called out as a USP. And again, is there an opportunity to add that to our shot list? If we move on, I've one last tip for you guys, a bonus tip on this. And this is where, you know, you can use Google just to see. If we have a look at that, Anya, we can have a look at how we do this. So if you go on to Google search, and we're going to open the browser in Google, and we'll type in things to do with children in Sligo. Now, if we scroll down to the bottom of the page, what you will see there is these are the related searches. So this gives you an indication of the kind of things that people are searching for. Google is very helpful like that. It's all based on search volume. And you'll see it mentions pet farm, it mentions bowling. Now, these will obviously differ depending on where you are in the country. But again, I mean, is there an opportunity to partner with a local provider who can help to provide those images for you that you might want to include in your marketing materials and also in your social media assets as well. All right, so let's go back to our shot list. We've done a little bit of work on that. We've started by looking at our existing inventory. Then we're beginning to put our shot list together based on some insights coming from reviews, from booking engines. I'd also ask our staff, what are the things that are being particularly mentioned? So once we have that, we're going to have a little look at image selection, okay? So the first thing I'd say is that poor quality images and video definitely can damage your sales. I mean, the first thing we all do, or as I mentioned earlier, as humans, we're very visual creatures. The first thing I always do when I'm looking at an accommodation or experience is I go and have a look at the gallery because I want to get a sense of what it's like. And those videos and photos are helping to make an emotional connection. Does this look like it's the kind of accommodation or experience that I might like to participate in? So it's very important that the connection that we're making is positive. And I think it goes without saying that if we're using poor quality images, that is unlikely to be the case. So I think if we move on, I mean, the first thing to say is that we're making sure that our images aren't stretched or distorted. Now, there's a couple of easy ways to have a look at this if you don't want to do a full sprawl of your own website. And I think let's have a look at this and we look at the example of, we'll do a little search on Paris Court Hotel. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look to see what kind of images are being indexed on Google for Paris Court. And this is a kind of a quick way of finding out if I was a customer and I search this, and you can do this for your own business, what actually comes up. So the first thing you do is you'll see there's a little, under the search bar there, there's a little line of icons and we're going to click on images. So when we click on that, we can see here's all the images that are being indexed for Google. Now you'll notice that some of them are actually on the Paris Court website itself. And then some are ones that have been appearing in the media or whatever. And you can see at a glance, look, they're very high quality images that are being used here. So if you wanted to do that for your business, you can get a quick idea as to, the images that our audiences are likely to see. One last thing on this as well, if we just click back on the browser there, you'll see here that on the right, we have this Google My Business feature box. Now, what you can do here is make sure when you click on the photos there, you can say see photos. These are all the images that your business has uploaded onto Google My Business. So it's a good idea to check that those images are representative of you, that you're happy with the quality of them. I think sometimes this can get overlooked, and Google My Business is nearly the first thing that many customers can actually click on when they're interacting with your business. So it's very important that this is actually kept up to date. And I would actually make a note in your diary to regularly refresh those images. And if possible, do that every month. Now, there's actually a very good guide on how to optimize for Google My Business, including some detail on the use of images in Fáilte Ireland's marketing toolbox. It's a very easy to follow guide, and I would recommend when you get an opportunity to have a look at that. All right, so that's looking at how we can find out a little bit more about the images that we have. Next, what we're going to do is have a look at 11 kinds of images that will help us create a positive impact in our marketing. Now, the point to note here, I think, is that all of the images that I'm going to share with you guys are actually from Ireland's content pool. So what I'd say is, if you see any that are appropriate to your business, you can just log on to Ireland's content pool and they are free to use. So the first thing here is to make sure that your images represent your audience. On the left, you'll see we have this young couple, and it looks like they're really enjoying themselves on this bus tour down in Cork. And then on the right, we have an older couple. So these images are speaking to different audience types and will be appropriate for those particular audiences. Next, what we want to do is consider how images with unusual angles can actually help add interest. These can be particularly useful on social media. So on the left here, you see it's a pretty cool aerial shot actually of Kilkee, and it almost looks like a painting. And then on the right, we have this heritage park in Westmeath, and it's kind of shot from a slight angle underneath. So again, kind of unusual angles. Can we incorporate these into our shot list? Next, we can look for images that actually are helping us frame our subject. Now, this is a good approach that you can use if you're shooting for yourself. On the left here, you'll see Boyle Abbey, and it's nicely framed by the kind of walls of the abbey itself. And then on the right, you'll see Mizzen Head, and that's a really good shot framed by the rocks in the image. So think about framing and think about that approach when you're commissioning your photography or you're actually doing a little bit of DIY. Next, I think it goes without saying, but we'll say it anyway. It's important that your images are seasonally appropriate to your marketing. And I'm thinking of this now, particularly as we come into the shoulder season. So let's bear in mind that if we are commissioning photography, we're allowing for a costume change if we have models involved in the shoot, and we're looking to get images that are going to be suitable for a variety of seasons. Another thing to watch out for is action shots. Action shots can really help us portray emotion. And this one here on the left, I think we'll all recognise, is down in Salt Hill. Great action shot there. And on the right, you have to kind of look a little closely, but here's a great action shot of scaling of the old head and Kinsale. So think about kind of what action shots you could include in your shot list, because we get good value from these shots. And next then, I think it's important, as we said earlier, your visitors are interested in the destination. So, I mean, identifying the local icons in your area is a good idea. So on the left here, we have a very iconic Guinness storehouse. And then on the right, we have Fanad. So again, just look at what are the kind of local icons, I would call them, and how can you include those in your lists. And next, we may also have opportunities to actually capture interesting perspectives in our photos. And you can actually even call this out on social media. So, for example, on the left, you'll see, you know, when you look at that image first, you don't initially spot the surfer against that incredible backdrop of Skellig. So, for an image like that, you could actually make that work super hard on social by asking a question on social media. For example, who spotted this brave surfer against the amazing backdrop of Skellig? We might even add, may the force be with them, if we were including that reference to Star Wars. So unusual perspectives are helpful to add interest to our images. Next, important to include shots of people in your inventory and in your shot list. On the right, you will see Josie here in a cafe. You can tell at a glance that this is a very family-friendly place to visit. And on the left, then, we see our visitor enjoying a good old coffee break. I actually read research recently which said that photos with hands can perform even better than photos with full people in them. So I do think we should be including those kind of hand shots and those people shots in our inventory. And then we have one more, number 9 now. Obviously color, you know, which adds immediate impact, helps us create a mood. These are good examples on the left from Limerick and on the right from Galway, and they kind of almost scream out, this is a happy and a vibrant place. So think about colour when you're creating your shot lists. And on number 10, absolutely ties into the icons. You know, there are also local icons that may not be as big as the Guinness Storehouse. I think if you can support other local businesses in your visual asset library, you can collaborate with those. It's always good to shout out to your neighbours, and there'll be some brilliant examples in every location in the country. And then finally, when it comes to images and videography, we're also looking for epic nature shots. And I think the good news here is that we have them in abundance in Ireland. And again, this is a one where you might collaborate with other businesses. For example, is there a local fishing trip that maybe has images of the dolphins that you'll see here on the left now? That's up at Malin. Or on the right. And as I said, all of these images are actually on the content pool. So like if you don't have a drone camera and you don't have the budget to go out and capture epic shots, there's plenty of epic shots that are actually there ready to be used by you all for free on Ireland's content pool. All right, so look, we've covered some of the basics of getting our shot list together, how to find out what our customer wants. And we've had a look at a kind of an approach to photography over 11 approaches. What about video? Well, look, it goes without saying there's been an absolutely massive increase in the use of video, and honestly, it shows no sign of slowing down. And I think it's fair to say that video is now such an important part of every business's sales and marketing efforts. We've seen it's what our customers want. And it actually works, you know. I mean, we've been proven that viewers retain 95% more information through video than text, and people stay on pages with video 3 times as long. So I think looking at how we can use video in our businesses is particularly important. Now, if we move on, the next session in the Spotlight series will be going into much more detail about the use of video. But what I would say is, you know, when you're looking at commissioning or creating video, it makes sense to use the COPE method. And that's where we are planning in a way that allows us to create once and publish everywhere that matters. So when I talk about publishing, I mean on social media, on my website, perhaps through banner ads and email marketing. And I think this, if we have a look at this, it's worth having a look at how Powerscourt are using video on their website. Particularly good at this. And we haven't been seeing a huge amount of video on websites per se used in this way. But Powerscourt have done a great job here. Essentially what they're doing is when you land on their homepage, they're showing a video journey essentially. So it starts with this kind of autumn scene, very appropriate because they're actually marketing their midterm breaks. We can see our little tag there waving in the top left-hand corner. We're following our audience. They're driving up the avenue. They're being welcomed. They look very happy, which is always good. They're being greeted at reception. A lot of smiling. We're seeing the rooms. We're getting a really good sense of what it's like to be that couple visiting, you know, having the scones out on the terrace. So have a look at what Parasport are doing, because they're doing a very good job here in how video has been used. One thing I would mention at this point, because I know I've spoken about social, I do believe that on social it is better to be really, really great on one channel, for example, like Instagram, and make that the channel that your audience is predominantly on, than being spread very thinly across too many channels. So I think that's one point that I would mention. The other thing that I'd mention here is that, you know, there are a number of different digital sizes for different channels. Now that can make things a little bit difficult, but I've included this as a very handy reference. And one point I'd make is that the most typical size we see is square. It tends to work on many of the different channels. So when you're actually shooting video, it's a good idea to frame for squares. So you can actually shoot landscape, which is this one here in the middle, but the action is framed in the center to give us the square, so that when we cut down for social, it'll have more of a multitude of uses. But again, the next spotlight session will go into this in a little bit more detail. Vertical formats are also increasingly important. We'll have seen a significant use of vertical on TikTok and Instagram, so it's important that we bear that in mind as well. So I think the good news we can say about images and video is there's loads and loads of places that we can go for inspiration, and this is what really helps us actually develop out that great shot list and provide you know, similar examples from other businesses as a reference. So I really think it's a good idea to reference. And if we move on now from our digital sizes and formats, let's have a little look about how we do that. So referencing for inspiration, anybody who develops video or any content of any description is constantly referencing. There's probably no new such thing as an absolutely unique idea, to be honest. I find Instagram is brilliant for this. It's an absolutely visual platform. So it's a really, really good source of reference for inspiration when it comes to video and photography. And I'd really suggest that you do the 5 things that we have listed here, and find, follow and learn from just a handful of accounts. It'll make a big difference. Now, I definitely include businesses in your industry. I'd also make space for an international business that you admire, but pick one that has a very good following, because you can have a look and see what's working well for them, and that will give you some ideas. I'd also follow influencers in your sector, look at some competitors you admire. Also follow accounts like Discover Ireland and related accounts like the Wild Atlantic Way or Ireland's Ancient East. And I'd actually include a couple of accounts that are not necessarily related to your business. I honestly look for inspiration everywhere. So looking at some of these kind of accounts is actually a good idea. I think if we move on now, we can see that lots of inspiration for video and how video is being structured if we take a look at Reels. And if Reels has taught us anything, it's that short really works best. So the rule here is really that, you know, to keep your video short and sweet. Reels will typically be from 7 to 15 seconds, although you can actually make longer reels now. But what I'd say is that, you know, a good reel is really based around its content. It's not really about the length. I think if the content isn't relatable, it won't matter how short it is. What's good about short reels, however, is that they loop. So, you know, they loop around and around when they play, and that can account for multiple views, and the algorithm actually picks that up. and it may push your video out to more users. I think longer reels can work great if you're looking to maybe share a skill or a recipe, or maybe do a tour, or share a list, for example. And if we have a quick look at this one here on the right, this is an example from Roz Purcell, who's an influencer, does a lot around hospitality, tourism, hiking, outdoors.
Stop and save, because these are the 10 best food spots around Westport.
Right, so there we have Roz. So I think, look here, we'll move quickly on. Couple of accounts that I particularly like. I think on the right here, we have Brunch with Babs. She's created a huge following. She creates very, very simple little videos showing kind of how to clean your house, make food, all of that. One to follow. And on the left, one of my particular favorites, this is a guy in Cavan called Pergola Nurseries, and every day he literally shows a new plant that's in season and ready to be planted. So it's totally authentic, very consistent, and he's got a great little signature sign off at the end of every video where he goes, "Goodbye for now and enjoy your garden." I've actually spent a fortune with this business based off his Instagram videos. I think it just shows that you can actually use video in that way. It may be a sales video, but it doesn't come across like that. If we move quickly on in the tourism industry, there's loads of examples. We have Burton House here in its high. These guys have a great aesthetic. They share around food, interiors, gardens. They're also very good. You'll often see them using the same type of shot, but from a number of different angles. So you could have a look at that. So I suppose just to round up on a few tips, I'd say use stock images where appropriate. It's obviously a little bit more tricky, you know, when you're dealing with, say, food dishes that are very particular to your own location. With stock, I'd watch out for editorial use clauses because, you know, there's certain images that are only available for editorial use and you can't use those on your products or ads. We've got a few free resources here that you can reference later on. And I think when it comes to generating UGC images, running a competition is a great idea. Ask your audience to share the best photo of your menu item or something like that. All right, so before we go into copywriting tips, I'd like to just make mention GDPR and permissions. Now, this is obviously very important. You know, when you're shooting video, you need to make sure you have signed release forms for anybody participating in that video. I could do a whole session on GDPR in itself, but what I'd say is there's some great resources on the Fáilte Ireland website about this, also including our release form that you can use for that purpose. Okay, so I think we'll switch on, we'll go straight on into hashtags actually on for tight for time, and we can come back on to copywriting if we have time for that. Yeah, so you'll see hashtags being used on social media. They're incredibly important, and they're really to help us kind of index content around shared likes. So it's really important that you're aware of hashtags and you're able to use them as appropriate to your business. I'm going to share a little cheat sheet with you guys that you can use, and this will allow you to start putting together a kind of suite of hashtags. So you'll see on the left here, the first one is a branded hashtag. So this is usually hashtag and then your business name. The next one is your industry. So for example, if we're a surfing business, we would use the hashtag surfing. Next, we have a hashtag that is for our target audience. In this instance, it's hashtag surfers. We might include one that's directed towards our community. Now, this would be a hashtag that the people that are interested in surfing would actually use themselves. And in this instance, it's surf life. And then we also would have a content specific hashtag, in this example, wakeboard. And then finally, your location. Now, there's a free tool that you can use to check out hashtags. You'll see it down here at the bottom, display purposes. So have a look at that in your own time. And you'll see here also, we have another example there. Just a couple of quick rules. You would build out 3 sets and rotate them. You can research what your industry are using and also what competitors are using. And I think it's a good idea to research influencers as well and what they're using. Okay. Now, they need to make sense, obviously, and they need to be things that people would actually look for. And we don't include spaces, punctuation, or symbols, and we're going to keep them very short. I'd always suggest the Goldilocks approach, neither too niche or too broad. And also, don't overdo it. Just because Instagram allows 30, let's not do that. Too many, and it may go against us. Okay. So, some final thoughts. I think the first thing I'd say is that generating content is a lot of work. So, don't beat yourself up about it. I think if you have 30 minutes to spare a day, you can do a lot with that. You can also look at delegating to other people on your team. If you have younger people on your team, perhaps they're social natives. They may be useful to you in creating content appropriate for social. It's a really, really good idea to plan out 3 months in advance. The next thing is, as I said, find out what your customer really, really wants. Also, don't forget, be brilliant on one channel and don't get distracted with trying to be great on loads and loads of channels. The other thing I'd say is that it's not every brand that has tons and tons of fans. So don't feel bad if you don't have thousands and thousands of fans. The last thing is that people are really conscious of marketing messages. They can smell it a mile off. So I think it's really important that we're aware of that, and we're framing all of our content and videography and photography from the customer's perspective. And finally, I think it's important that we have a bit of fun. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is capture the passion that your team have, that you have for your business. We can do it through DIY. We can use our smartphones, and really what we're trying to do is to share that excitement and that enjoyment on a daily basis. And once we're doing that, I think we can't go too far wrong. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm back to Amanda.
Thanks a million. Thanks a million, Karen. That's really, really great.